We're live. My guest today is Fraser Edwards. He's co-founder and CEO at Cheqd. They're building infrastructure for verified credentials. In today's conversation, we will discuss what is decentralized identity and reputation and the different approaches, why DID is important in the context of AI, identity and privacy and why they must go hand in hand, and also we'll talk about the Cheqd's verifiable credentials platform. I'm also dying to find out why he thinks identity and credentials will save us from the AI apocalypse. So before we get started, make sure to hit the like button, hit the notification bell, and subscribe to get notified when I go live every week. And remember that none of what we discuss here on the Interrupt is investment advice. And if you enjoy this content, please consider staking with us. We're validating on Evmos, Quicksilver, Osmosis, and Juno. Just look for Interrupt in the active set. And I hope you've booked your tickets for Paris this summer for Nebula Summit. I'm freaking excited about this conference. Fraser and his team will be there, and they're also sponsoring. We're very happy with that. It's happening on July 24th and 25th. It's 2 days of technical talks about Cosmos, IBC, and the interchain. No panels, no bullshit, just tech talks and workshops to get your minds going. The second batch of early bird tickets is still up. There are still early bird tickets available. You can get those at nebular.builders. My guest, Fraser Edwards, is coming up next, right here on the Interrupt. Fraser, how's it going?
Hello. Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on. Yeah, so we are going to be talking about DID today. It's a topic that I've been kind of following for years, and it's a topic also that lots of people have been working on for years. And I almost want to say, like, here's another guy working on DID, but I hope you're going to solve the problem, the sort of the issue of DID. And seems like Cheqd is sort of ticking all the boxes there to get some to get DID sort of in the hands of people in ways that are actually useful for folks. But before we dive into all of that, yeah, tell me a little bit about how you became so interested in this topic.
Cool. Yeah, love to. And I guess to reiterate what you said there, like, yeah, we really hope that that's the bit that we're solving, and we're going to actually break this wide open. So that's really what we're here for. So yeah, really, like I kind of left uni, went to work at Accenture, and just bounced around tech for a while. So went through things like biometrics, a little bit of AI when it was still just like machine learning. Went into like blockchain, CDBC stuff, like cross-blockchain payments, all that kind of stuff. And then fell into SSI maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, SSI, Decentralized ID. And I don't know, just like it felt natural in terms of like it's almost like a backlash against like being able to like having all that data siloed off where you can't use it and you can't do anything with it and it's locked away from you. But I think the real thing for me was seeing like demonstrations of the tech and seeing like how smooth the user experience was and what it could impact. So it was a weird thing of like I was changing technology maybe every year and a half while I was there. And then I landed on this. I was like, this is cool. And I think it's going to completely change like the data paradigm around the world across everything. And it's just waiting to come through. And it also felt that there was like that slow wave of like people being like, oh, I don't like the fact that all my data's with like Facebook's and Google's. Like I want to have more control. So it felt like there was a bit of a philosophical like wave coming that was ready to anchor onto. And then the real thing that got me into it though was I ended up leading a project where we were trying to do self-sovereign decentralized ID for international travel, like aviation. And so you like digitize the passport, it would go onto your like mobile, you'd bring your boarding pass in there, you'd bring anything else that you need, and then you'd share it in advance to like all the touch points on both sides of the journey in the airport. And you do the entire journey based on biometrics. Like you'd share everything in advance, so you'd have the control, and then you'd walk through. And that was just like it was like such a big vision and transformational, but the user experience was awesome. Like it was so good. Just like whenever we showed it to people, like, oh, this is how travel should work. So I think that was kind of where I fell into it, was just like mostly a bit of a philosophical wave, but also just like loving the user experience when you see it done right, which is something I hope we will go and execute on Creds as well.
Yeah, the promise, I think, of DID is so vast, and there are so many use cases that this concept, or even the standard, because there is a standard, we'll talk about that a little bit, can solve, or sort of can be applied to. And people in crypto have been talking about this use cases for about 10 years. So back in the days when I was running this enterprise blockchain company in France, and around 2016, we were talking about leveraging DID to do KYC and this sort of thing. And like these use cases have been kind of floating around since forever. People have tried to do it, and like this is the thing, right? Like a digital identity to one KYC to solve them all, and you could just kind of take that KYC token and move it to a different place. And trust me, I'm starting a fund right now, so I'm right in the middle of like all of this kind of process of doing KYC. But it hasn't really materialized, and I wonder why. Like, what do you think are the big barriers for real decentralized identity, or digital identity? Sorry, we shouldn't confuse DID with decentralized identity, although it can be. It's digital identity. Why hasn't it taken off in the way that we would hope to?
Yeah, I'd say it's probably three things. I think one of them, like you gave the example of KYC, and the reality is, like, up until very recently, and it's still only just coming through now, the regs aren't there. Like the regulations and legislation is not there to allow you to go down that path. That's changing like now, but it's one of those things that like everyone was trying this like 5 to 10 years ago, be like, this is the one to solve. But it's like, well, even though the technology worked, you just couldn't sell it because like from a regulatory standpoint, it was dead on arrival. I think the other thing is, and I'm realizing now this might be 4 points rather than 3. The other thing is that everyone was going after these like super high assurance use cases. So going after like passports, driving license, stuff that like you need regulatory clarity, you probably need the governments involved. Like it's super hard stuff that takes a long time. And actually, like there's a load of cool stuff that I think we're going to do with Creds, which like it's more fun, it's like more frequent, you're using it on a daily basis, and like it doesn't require such a lengthy period to go and deploy it. The other two things I think are like all of the DID, like decentralized ID, like positioning has always been focused on individuals and giving that power back. And like I think I'm not going to argue that that's great, but it's missing the angle, which is like it's got to be viable and like attractive to companies to shift from the way that they're doing stuff now to the way that everyone thinks that they should be doing it. So all of the positioning was like, yeah, get your data back and take it wherever you want. And you're like, well, it doesn't matter if I believe that. Like, I can't do that unless the company or someone is allowing me to do it. And then the final one, which is really closely related to that, is like making that commercially viable. So that's the bit that Cheqd was founded to do, which is like incentivize people, like incentivize whether it's a company or an individual to release that data to whoever the subject is, and then like collectively share in like the value of that as it moves around. And so I think like that's there's kind of those 4 points there. And I think it's a combination of all of them. I think personally at Cheqd, we think it's the last one is the most pressing one, but yeah, it's probably a combination of all four somewhere.
Yeah, my hypothesis for years has been that we only really care about ID that is issued by state actors. I mean, to the extent that we use ID, that most people are comfortable or sort of used to using ID, it is in the context of using a state issued ID to prove something to a most of the time like private sector actor, like going through an airport and proving who you are to the flight attendant. I mean, mostly like that is also because of regulation, right? So they're sort of deputized to enact regulation that comes from, say, the FTA, the FAA, or whatever. But my point is that until states begin issuing DID, that it would be difficult for it to take off unless we start rethinking what we think is ID being. And I think this is where Cheqd really comes in with this idea of decentralized reputation, where it's not like who you are so much as what things you've done, or actions you've taken, or things you're involved in, or this sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's like SSI and decentralized ID always had the same, like a similar problem, which is like you pointed it out, like identity. And people, for example, don't think about receipts when they think about identity, but the reality is like if you think instead about credentials or trusted data, like the use of a receipt can actually be really, really useful, important. Like the sheer number of people who will be, say, buying stuff. Like a great example would be like if you're traveling for work and or you buy something and you get a receipt, being able to share that to someone else to either get it insured or get reimbursed. Like right now, that's people scanning PDF, like scanning like piece of paper or getting emails to themselves, like, and then having to go through this massive process. Whereas actually, like all of that could be solved with credentials, and it's not identity at all. So it's almost done itself a disservice by just like focusing on like decentralized ID, where really it could just be credentials, which could be used for anything. And so like I think that's where like that move away maybe from decentralized ID or just identity as a thing and shifting more towards like generic trusted data, whatever that happens to be, is going to just that. I think that's where the adoption is going to be, and it'll be so much quicker, I think, than like waiting for nation states to like issue decent like digital credentials. Some of them are already doing it, but like it's going to take time for it to be global. So I think that's definitely the shift in where we're expecting to see adoption. And then to your point, like not just blending stuff like receipts or like memberships and stuff, but like really social proofs that you're taking. Like I think everyone watching probably knows at least a few people who like are sending 5 to 6 digit like sums in crypto to each other, and they're operating on like just Telegram handles and the fact that they've known each other for 5 years. Like, and it's not based on anything to do with identity traditionally. It's all based on like trust and knowledge and history. And I think that's where it's going to head to more, is like, can I trust this person in this interaction, rather than like, yeah, do I know everything about this person and where they live, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it sounds like, I feel like we're going around, say we're abstracting away a little bit of the trust that has traditionally been imbued in institutions and state actors delivering ID, right? Like, okay, so we trust this nation state or whatever, like to issue an ID, or we trust like the utility provider to have an accurate idea of like where someone lives. But with what you guys are doing and this idea of credentials, we move that trust like onto another. Like it's almost like the trust is displaced somewhere else, or we spread the trust across different different points. So you may have like a point of trust with like a merchant, or you might have a point of trust with a social login, or maybe several social logins. Is that a right way to think about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it really comes down to like that decentralized part of it. Is you, to your point, you're getting that trust from different anchors. So rather than it, like in the KYC example, it's typically coming from the fact that your like passport or driving license come
Anchors
from
is
the
the word I was
government.
looking for. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like you're then shifting that to multiple anchors. So one of the things we want to get through with creds is like having almost every project, every DAO, like at least in Cosmos and probably a lot wider, issuing credentials to people that they can then go and take elsewhere. And so like suddenly that trust isn't just like driven by one place, it's driven by loads. And we might touch on it later on, but like that's one of the major reasons why like this will be useful against like fraud or AI, where it's like historically that's going from like one area of trust rather than something really decentralized. So you're exactly right. It's like it's just diffusing that trust out to different anchors, which is going to be really cool. And then the fun starts on like, well, who do you trust? Who do you not trust? Like, how do you start making that visible? And there's ways to do it, but it's like that's the fun stuff. It's kind of, we'll touch on, I guess maybe touch on it in a bit, but like where you start getting into decentralized reputation scores, that kind of stuff, and like who cares about what, how that gets tailored, is it dynamic, like who chooses like these things independently, is it on a peer-to-peer basis, which we think it is. Like, yeah, that's all the fun stuff that like I think is coming along in the next couple of years.
Yeah, can we talk about the standards a little bit? Because I like geeking out on web standards because I think they're cool, and they're a great public resource. So tell me a little bit about how the DID standard works, and you guys are using the Web3 or Web3 W3C
W3C.
W3C DID standard.
So like for those that don't know, like DID gets used like it gets used for a couple of things. So you've got like decentralized ID, but DID also stands for decentralized identifiers. And what that basically is like almost a representation or an identifier that can be used for kind of two things. You typically will have like a public did and a private did. Is how a lot of like decentralized ID works. And the idea with a public did is it's more like it's something on ledger. It's typically associated with like a company or an organization or a DAO, so something that has like a structure. And then off ledger, like peer to peer, you can have decentralized identifiers again. And what you can use those for is like I can identify myself to you via this did, and I can share some credentials to you, and then I can go off elsewhere, and then I'll have a completely different did. So like, and if I share completely different credentials to that person, those two people can't collude. They've got nothing about me that like brings that identity together. So you can kind of maintain your privacy a little bit better that way, in that like there's no unique identifier bringing it all together. But the certainly like at the ledger layer, the public dids, like we use the W3C data model, and I think there's like the standard. There's also, I think, about to be, and this is like an area that Alex from our team is way better than I am. There's a W3C VC standard coming out as well. I think it's either in draft or like going through. And so I think maybe that's a point that we missed, like I missed earlier in my 4 points. Like the other thing has been that like the W3C did standard only, I think, was approved last year as a standard. So there's, despite all this work, like it only was last year where it actually got put through. And then there's all this other stuff like verifiable credential models. There's probably going to eventually be one around like revocation and how you manage that. So it's like it's also super early days in terms of like how the technology stack is going to work out and how all these things fit together. Every single year there seems to be like a new implementation or a new standard that's coming through. So it's also, I think, a little bit like the crypto sphere in terms of like everyone is experimenting and figuring out what works. But yeah, it's the fact that like that's now a standard is super helpful to just coalesce around.
Yeah, no, that's cool. I didn't realize that it had only become a standard last year, because I know that there's been working groups for many years, but I guess I was on the page a while ago, and it had 2022 up there, so should have figured that. Yeah, cool. Well, let's dive into Cheqd a little bit. So for those who are not familiar with Cheqd, what is Cheqd? We know it's a Cosmos chain. We know that it deals in decentralized identity and credentials. Explain to people what it is and what you guys are building here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll kind of refer it back to like the problem that I think has stopped adoption going as quickly as it should have done. So the founding story of Cheqd is that myself and Anchor, at the same time as we were delivering stuff like big SSI decentralized ID projects, we were also doing like loads and loads of sales into enterprise. And pretty consistently we're hitting the same wall, which is like, the tech's amazing, this is really cool. We love the user experience. We love like putting data at the power of individuals. Like one of the interesting things when you're speaking to companies is like they're still made up of individuals and they still just kind of grab onto that idea. But the bit where it always fell down every single time was like, where's the money? Like, how do I make money from this? Like, if I have to spend, let's say it's $500,000 putting the system in and all of this happens, like, what's my return on investment? Where does that come from? And so after 6 months of going through that process, like and no one's solving it, we're like, okay, we're gonna have to go and solve that ourselves. And so basically what Cheqd is payment and commercial infrastructure for credentials. So the key thing to understand is like the credentials move off ledger. We can then enforce a payment on ledger for anyone to like let's say I give you your data, you go and take it elsewhere. Like when that data gets reused, me as the original issuing party can kind of derive some value from the fact that you're reusing that data elsewhere, which then kind of incentivizes like me as a company to give you your data back and allow you to take it wherever you want, as well as you can like participate yourself in that value flow too. So really the key thing there is like it's payment infrastructure for credentials, which is still privacy preserving. So some of the things you'll see with like maybe soulbound tokens is like the data's on ledger, which is dangerous on its own, but also you can see exactly who everyone is interacting with and like basically the graph of like their social like interactions. Whereas what we've managed to do, we believe, is like have that entirely privacy preserving. So you can go off and live your life, take your data wherever you want to, and neither the whoever issued that data in the first place will have no idea. We won't have any idea, and no one else should either. And that's kind of the key differentiator for us. And the real, I guess, the mission for us is like use this as incentives to release data out from companies, get it back in the hands of individuals, and actually like make SSI adopted. Because I think going back, like that's one of the main problems was it just wasn't commercially viable, and so that's really where Cheqd has come in. And then I should say as well, like we then have like I think it's 49 partners worldwide who do different industries and different verticals. So some of them are doing stuff in like supply chain. Some of them are actually looking at the reusable KYC. So we're working with one of our partners on that.
God, I
So
wish
if
I had
anyone is,
that right now.
yeah, exactly. And I know exactly what the process you're going through. It's horrific. Like, and especially just every single time you're opening up another account, and just to labor the point as well, you're probably, I would imagine, you're probably finding in certain scenarios, you're like going through the same onboarding process with different companies, but they're actually under the hood using the same company as a supplier. So like this happens quite a lot on like retail KYC for exchanges. Like all of them are using the same people. So you're just yeah, it's insane. The whole thing is insane. It makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, currently what we're going through right now, and I don't know how interesting this is to people, but in the process of onboarding, service providers, law firms, etc. But it's not only just doing like KYC for one entity; it's doing KYC for all the entities that go up to the beneficial owners, and there's like a couple of layers there because we have holding companies, etc. And it's such a mess. Like I've got a whole like Notion document that I just share with everyone that has probably, I don't know, 70 PDFs attached to it, like something crazy like that, right? But yeah, it's a mess, and like this is like a very unique use case, right? But even just for KYC, like opening accounts at exchanges and things like that, you're right. I mean, like how many times if you open an account at some exchange or some fintech bank or something like that, you recognize the same interface. This is the exact same interface. You've done this process before with the service provider. They have the information, or at least they verified it. And because of compliance and sort of the burden put on the financial sector and financial institutions to make sure that you are who you say you are, you're not laundering money or whatever. That burden is so high that every single company that is going to interact with an individual or company is going to be incentivized to do that work again and again and again until we have strong enough standards or sort of regulatory, you mentioned just earlier, like regulatory backing or buy-in of some sort of rubber stamping system that allows your identity to be verified once and then carried over into different realms.
Yeah, and the good thing is it's actually coming through. So that is changing. So like the company that we're working with is more focused on like individuals and reusable KYC for individuals, but like they're speaking to a load of people across the US and then wider. And that's really cool to see. Like it is starting to change. And there's things like EIDAS. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but it's basically like European
European
identity.
Digital Signature and Identity Regulation. which I
Yeah.
also don't remember what it stands for, but yeah,
But that's coming in across Europe, and like that's suddenly giving all this clarity that like yes, it's happening. Like this is absolutely coming, which is so good. It's just going to
Yeah,
take
but
time.
you know, the thing with ADAS is that it exists in theory, but it doesn't exist in practice. And
Yeah.
you know, I live in France, and I mean, like, I'm a strong proponent of digital signatures and ADAS, but mostly, you know, if you show up with, look, if you're working with a company that doesn't, within their processes, isn't going to accept a digital signature, even though it's a binding signature, you're giving them a document that they've essentially sort of signed on their end, and you've digitally signed it. They may ask for wet signatures, and there are
Yeah.
also, and I mean, like, these are edge cases, right? But like, for instance, in Germany, if you're doing any sort of thing that has to do with transferring shares between like if you're selling shares, something like that, the law requires wet signatures, and notaries will hold you to it. I've done this, and so
Yeah.
you know, it's
It's
it's a
insane. Like
mess.
we've had something similar where we've got a holding company. We've been at like there's three or four board members. We've been asked to like sign this document, and to your point, they're like wet signature, and we're like, none of us live in the same country. Like, how the hell? Like, are we literally going to have to get the same piece of paper and courier it around the world to like just to
Yep.
get this done? It's insane. It is absolutely insane.
Of course.
Um,
Of course you're going to do that, right? Yeah, or
it's just
fax
like
it, you know. Maybe we need to get back to the faxing.
there's
um
yeah, sorry, go on.
no, but so I want to talk a little bit about you know, this idea that digital identity, you know, sort of turns into digital reputation. And I think in crypto, in the last couple of years at least, there has been this um well, like projects or products that are building these kind of reputational credentials. A lot of times, I think it's in the context of DAOs, right? So you want to be able to identify, you know, members that are, you know, having sort of virtuous behavior with regards to the DAO. So it could be like staking tokens, or it could be voting in governance, or, you know, participating in Discord or whatever. And that, I think, starts to paint a picture of how this decentralized reputation thing could work. So it, you know, and I think coming back to your earlier point also about, you know, how we're sort of decentralizing, or to some extent spreading the anchors of trust, right? Instead of having one anchor of trust, we're spreading those anchors of trust across different you know, domains and sort of, you know, third parties. But like the question here is, you know, with regards to, if you think of identity, like reputation as identity, we have an example of that, and that's China's social scoring system,
Yeah.
and how closely those two things are tied. And I've heard people talk about how they're worried that this shift that's happening here, this idea of, you know, decentralized reputation, is an implementation of that just run by the private sector, but that has the same end, you know. So in the end, you just
Yeah,
end up with
yeah.
the same result. Yeah, sorry, that's like,
Yeah,
that's a lot, but for context, maybe addressing that, and how you
yeah.
see this playing
And
out.
it's important. Like it's probably one of the most like potentially dangerous and dystopian things that like that could happen. So I think a lot of it is based on the architecture of how you design the stuff. So a great example is like all of the stuff that we're building, all the data lives off ledger, and you decide what you share and who to. And obviously there's a trade-off. Like someone's going to be asking you for certain stuff for like whatever that interaction with is. Like if you're, let's say it's your friend who wants to borrow like 10 grand, like as long as it's like the handle that's coming in and like you've got a history and you can tell it's actually them, you're probably fine. But then if it's like, I don't know, an exchange, they're going to want to move off that, and they're going to have like KYC data. So I think that's where like it's the decentralized reputation side. I think if you're putting something that's universal and you're putting that, say, on a ledger, that is where that is scary, because like anyone can see it. It is completely visible to everyone. Everyone can operate off it. And you have no control on what feeds into that and how it's perceived. And so, like, it's one of the dangers where, like, if people are using soulbound tokens, for example, for identity, like it's super dangerous because you could start profiling people based on like what they hold that is public. And so that's one of the reasons why like having this data off ledger in private is like super important. And then it comes down to like peer connections, I guess. And I think maybe the best way of articulating it is like making sure it's truly decentralized. And what I mean by that is that like the whole stack is like you can move bits about, you can move that around wherever you want to. And there's nowhere where there's like a single source or record of what is going on that is visible to anyone else. Like if you're writing that to a ledger, if you're making all of that public, like that is a problem. Whereas what we focused on is being able to like have peer-to-peer interactions where you're sharing different data to different people. And theoretically, like if I was interacting, say, with you and I was doing it over like Twitter and I shared some credentials over that channel, but then I shared some completely different credentials to like Eduardo, our head of marketing, like YouTube wouldn't know, like you wouldn't be able to tell that, you wouldn't be able to collude basically. And you could each ask for completely different things based on that interaction. And so you could be scoring, like even though it's kind of a reputation, it's like a reputation for that interaction rather than your reputation as a whole. So like a good example would be like my reputation at work versus how creditworthy I am. Two completely different things, and neither of those things should be should be public in the same realm. They should only be public when I decide to share them. So I think like the big thing this comes down to is like architecting it properly, making it so that like it's individuals deciding what they share, how much they share, who to, and also that they can tear that down afterwards if they want to pull it back. So like they can share some credentials and be like, probably wish I didn't share that, and then just cut the link. So when we roll creds out, that'd be one of the things that like you'll have links that will have like sets of credentials tied to them. And one of the features we'll go on to like later on the line will be like breaking that link so that no one can see it anymore. So even if they have the hyperlink, they can't get anything from it. And that's, but to your point earlier, like it's so crucial we get it right, because if we get it wrong, like it's a dystopian nightmare. I think the good thing for us is because we're going privacy first and peer-to-peer first, it's almost impossible to build that up and go wrong based like as long as we maintain those principles and that direction.
So let's walk through how this works. So I mean, maybe from the perspective of a user that's sharing credentials, that's using Cheqd, can you describe a use case that may be relevant, and maybe also helping understand how that kind of transaction flow works, right? When you're sharing a credential and how someone verifies it, etc.
Yeah, great. Yeah. So let's use like an example of like, let's say someone has worked for like a DAO and then they want to go and apply and get like or maybe they've actually been working for like, let's say they've been working for an influencer or a DAO, and then they want to go and apply for a job with like a specific project to go and do something for them. So in this scenario, you'd have like the original DAO or the influencer would have like a public did. So that would be on ledger. Everyone can see who that is. They like all of that is visible, who that organization is. And then the next bit would be like the DAO could issue, say like, a credential to whoever that person is to say like, this person works for us, like they represent us currently, this is what they do, like this is their role, and they can like maybe add some stuff onto that of like what their seniority is, like what capacity they're employed in, like, and just stuff like a title. That person can then share that credential to whoever they want. So what's happened there is like the credential's been signed by the did, or it's related to the did of the DAO. The data then goes completely off ledger to the individual, like it's stored in a private wallet that they hold on like their mobile, or like in some whatever storage they want, maybe on something like Storage, Ceramic, like anything there. What they can then do is share that credential onto someone else. And so in this scenario, like let's say that they've been employed by this DAO, like they've done great work, like they've even got like an employment, like a review that says like they're awesome at what they do, they can then share that credential onto like a prospective employer to be like, look, I've done all this work for this DAO. They like, here's proof I was employed and proof that I've like executed well. And what happens is when the like receiving organization receives that data, they can check who originally signed it. So they know that they've got it from the right person and that it was signed by the right DAO in the first place. And they can check that against the ledger. And what that means is let's say the individual is working for like multiple DAOs and maybe influencers, they can pull all of these from different places and then start sharing whichever ones they think are relevant. So let's say it's a guy who's like got a mix of front end dev and is a pretty good like UI designer, and he's applying for like a dev role or let's say just the UI role, or UX UI designer role. He can just share the credentials that are relevant. So he can like collect all of them himself, have them in a wallet. And then whenever he goes elsewhere, he can start sharing the credentials he thinks are relevant and then build them up over time. So the key thing there is like basically the individual is completely in control of like what they're sharing in that scenario. And yeah, the project or DAO is going to ask for like, oh, could you share me stuff to back this up? And that's on the individual to like decide if they want to meet that criteria or not. Cool thing there is like you can combine them from so many different places. So what I'm looking forward to seeing is like, I know people taking their Crew 3 or Zeely reputation from Cheqd and maybe be able to go into a different DAO and be like, look, I can prove I'm a legit person and I'm a good actor because I've done all this other stuff for another project, and be able to move that around. So that's the kind of like the flow. But the key thing at all times is like the person is at the center and they're the ones in control and they're the ones who control their privacy as well. Like that's almost the key maxim of all of this is like, we've got to keep it centered around that.
Okay. So if I were to really oversimplify this, and I think my camera just decided to stop working. We'll fix that in a second. If I were to oversimplify this, thanks Sony for selling me a camera that can't stay on for 30 minutes. The idea is that with Cheqd, the credentials are off chain. They can be created and shared at one's will. It is up to the holder of those credentials to share them, revoke access to those credentials. What the blockchain does itself is it allows any party to verify the issuance of credentials by essentially being, I mean, maybe this is not the right term here, but a sort of register of signing authorities. So, we may even oversimplify this even more and say it's kind of a decentralized certificate authority.
That's a perfect analogy. And actually, to your point on like registry, you'll find that like a lot of people for networks like ours that maybe don't have the payment side of things, they call them VDRs. And I think that stands for verifiable data registries. And that's exactly it. And to your point, like it is very, very analogous to like decentralized PKI and certificate authorities. Like it's like conceptually like spot on. Yeah, and the kind of bit that I left out, which is really like Cheqd's USP, which maybe works less in the like employment example, is the ability for like whoever issues that data and releases it to like get paid in the future. So it's almost a bit like NFT royalties, where like whoever mints like can basically collect in the future. And the argument for doing it this way is that it basically incentivizes people to just get credentials out the door, even if the price is low, like super low, because the data is reusable. It kind of works out all around. Like it's cheaper for whoever gets the data. The individual like can monetize that as well. They can have a much better user experience, but also whoever has like this data in the first place can start giving it back, and it still commercially makes sense. So like that doesn't necessarily, like you could do it in the employment example, but it's a like commercially maybe it doesn't make so much sense. Whereas in other places, like KYC is a great example where like that the only way that industry is going to change is if there's a commercial construct behind it, because otherwise they've got no interest in cannibalizing their own industry.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think like so much of this has to do with aligning market incentives. Yeah. And
Yeah,
sometimes regulation sort of forces that on you, right? So in the case of things like GDPR, for instance, there was
yeah,
a regulatory incentive to implement certain processes, and certainly this could also be the case.
yeah. And I think I've almost started thinking of like decentralized ID SSI as like the philosophical endpoint of like GDPR, where GDPR you're kind of consenting, even though it's a pain and you're just forced to do it. Whereas like decentralized ID is you're taking control and ownership. You're not just consenting, like you have the control.
Yeah.
Um, and I just on the business side of like the incentive side of things, like one of the ones that I think is like that was an absolute slam dunk in terms of like the numbers that it was working on was there's a company called True, so TRW, and they were doing credentials for doctors. And inside the UK, if you move between different hospitals, you basically have to re-register and present all your documents from like your degree to like everything you're certified in. And they worked out that it was something like 100,000 doctor days a year across the NHS were literally just lost to like people turning up and having to present paperwork. And they were like, this
Oh
is
my
just
god.
mental. Yeah. And so
Yeah.
like, and if you imagine how much like a doctor gets paid per like day and per hour, they're like, the numbers are just absurd. Like, and it was such an easy business case to be like, if we put this in, we all collectively save money and we get better outcomes. Like, this is just a no brainer. So I think that's where the incentives like are so important on this stuff, because if you get them right, like that for example, that's running on credentials. It's running on VCs and has done for years. And yet it didn't need any legislation to put through. It didn't need like any higher authority. They just need to go and roll it out. Like that's the power of like getting the incentives right.
Yeah, and I mean, I hate to beat a dead horse, but coming back on KYC, this feels like such an easy problem to solve. I mean, we kind of have solutions to this already, and it's fairly simple, at least in Europe, right, where we have somewhat modern identity systems and like government and enterprise that are fairly well aligned and very closely tied. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it does provide, I think, the framework for this to be implemented, for this sort of thing to be implemented and kind of
Yeah,
well. But yeah.
and that's where like I don't want to name who it is, but like they're basically working on exactly this. And I'd hope in the next couple of months like I could actually start showing and demoing this out. But it would be like, yeah, you go through that process once and you can just share it repeatedly. And it could be anything from like into banking or like telcos or even like exchanges. So it could be anywhere. So like it's coming. It's definitely coming. And so I'm looking forward to the point where like I actually start showing this stuff off, because to your point, like everyone knows it's there and it's possible. It's just like, just give me it as a solution. Like that's the gap right now.
Yeah. So let's talk about the privacy aspect a little bit, and you guys actually, I'm going to spoil it. I think this is probably going to be the talk that you're giving at Nebula. You're talking about ZK credentials and using ZKPs in the context of credentials. Can you describe how you're using ZK to, well, I mean, to implement something that I think is like uniquely important, very important to identity, which is to be able to keep one's data private. And also I think there's another aspect here that I'd like to ask you about, is how do we use ZK to infer information about one's ID without revealing the ID? So this age old prove that you're over 18 without giving me your date of birth sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think probably one of the most unusual things about what we have is the ZKs are off ledger. So like on ledger, basically there's no personal data. There's a good reason for that. And it's like everything we spoke about before. So what we're using is basically ZKs off ledger for basic the proofing side. So the sharing side. So if you think of that triangle of like company or organization, individual, organization again, like this second leg is kind of like the proofing or sharing part. And that's where like ZKs come into their own. So you kind of alluded to it already, of like being able to prove age, that kind of thing. And I've got like an inbound like email into us that like I think is perfect as an example, which is it's a company that wants to put people through like basically they have to onboard people and take them through almost like a KYC like process. But then after that, they don't want to either hold that data, and they only want to know certain things about an individual that individual shares. It's a really unusual use case, at least like the thing that they're doing. And so what they're looking at is like they want an individual to be able to prove that they're like, say, male, over the age of 30, and have a potentially a specific like employment or job title. And so they don't really care, like they don't want to know like date of birth, and they don't want to know a bunch of other stuff. Like they're not, for example, interested in even the company that the person works for. They just want to know like job title. And so in that scenario, you can start using ZK where you're like, I can prove that I'm over the age, like over a certain age, without exposing anything about like anything about my like date of birth, or like having to even send like, you could also do this thing where like you don't even need to share like, let's say, a full driving license or a passport. You're just sharing the fact that you're over 30 with the fact that it's like coming from a trusted source. And then you can also share like for a credential which proves who you work for, but all they'll get is just the job title. And so we call it like selective disclosure. So you're just reducing down the data that you're actually sharing across to the other side to the bare minimum that's required. So the example that's always given, like for sets of disclosure and CKPs, is like going into an off license and buying like booze or cigarettes or a lottery ticket. That's the one that's always given, but it has so much other like use outside of that. You can use it for pretty much like whatever you want. So that's
basically it's being used for all of the bad things.
we joke
all the
about
things
it being
people shouldn't be doing.
Yeah,
Drinking,
we genuinely we call it the degenerate use cases.
Yeah.
The degen use cases, but yeah, that's what it's there for. And I think another example, which is more like Web3 crypto focused, would be like if you're a DEX or an NFT marketplace, or you're doing an airdrop, prove you're not from the US, like, because that's the jurisdiction that everyone is concerned about. And you don't need to know like that person's name. You don't need to know their address, anything really about them. They just need to be able to prove that they're not a US citizen, and therefore you can interact with them in that way. And I think that's
a hard one, because proving you're something is one thing, but proving that you're not a US citizen. So a lot of people, know that I'm Canadian, but they don't know that I'm French. And a lot of people think that I'm French, but they don't know I'm Canadian. So, and even in the context of, to other nation states, so people get passports while their other country doesn't allow them to get second passports. And so that's like much harder to do, I think, than simply proving that you are of a certain nationality.
Yeah. It's definitely complex. It's I think what I like about it is it's a bit more, I don't know, substantial, or like, I don't know, a bit more Web3 than walking into an off license and be like, I'm definitely above the age of 18, which is the one that's always given out. So that's, I think the cool thing about it as well is that you can, using that employment example from before, you can take data from like as many places as you want, like different credentials from completely different issuers and creators, bring them together, and then like and then select which bits from each one. So you could take like 5 credentials, take 5 like an attribute from each credential, and then no one else sees the rest of whatever else is in there. And so that has the potential to be really, really powerful, because you're reducing the data down to exactly what's needed. It's why I don't know if you do this, but I use Strava for cycling. And now they've started cutting off like the last eighth of a mile in terms of your location. So if someone sees your rides, they don't know exactly where you live. And
Yeah.
I think it's likely to be the same with like things like Uber, where like it is helpful to not always be exposing where you live. There's obviously horror stories that you hear around that, so it's
Yeah.
enabling that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And with regards to the ZK stuff, you mentioned in conversations we've had before that you talked about Penumbra, and I wonder, are you guys working with them, or are you leveraging their chain, or I mean, with not I mean not that they're launched yet, but are you intending on leveraging the chain?
Um, I don't think so, but it's something where like you just don't know what's going to get built out. Like we've got a separate team that is so this isn't our team. This is like one of our partners who's looking at bringing credentials on Ledger in a privacy preserving way, so you could say interact with a DEX or a liquidity pool or like whatever you want, and bring that credential in. So that could be like collateralized lending, where you bring something off Ledger on Ledger that then allows you to say reduce the collateral that you need to post. And I think that's where, as more stuff like obviously Secret's been around for a while, but like Secret, Penumbra, I think I need to remember how Anoma works, but like starting to combine all these things together.
Nobody knows how Anoma works, but even Anoma people
Yeah,
don't know how Anoma works.
exactly. So like, but like
It's a
being able
true
to
zero
bring,
knowledge project.
I love that. So be able to bring all these different like parts together. So that's where like I don't want to name check them yet, but like I think they're about to start unveiling what they're doing and how they're going to do it. And that could be something that I absolutely see, like where ourselves, this partner, and someone like Penumbra start working on, like, okay, for Penumbra, what would be interesting to bring on as a credential that suddenly enables something you weren't able to do before. So I don't have an answer yet, but I'd love to in like the space of 6 months to a year, where it's like, okay, let's go combine some stuff and see how it works out.
Cool. I'm also going to spoil your. Well, this isn't set in stone yet, but probably what will be your workshop at Nebular, which is about Telegram and Discord, and preventing spam. So, can you explain how we can leverage Cheqd to prevent spam in Discord and Telegram?
Yeah, and that's yes, and that's really where like we're kind of launching Creds and bringing that into beta over the next couple of weeks. So that's really closely related to that. And the idea behind Creds was kind of two streams. One is around like learning and engagement, and the other one was around protecting people. And I think it was like Akash and maybe Stargaze that had their Discords like compromised recently, and we see that like that happens all the time. And the other problem is then like fraudulent moderators and admins and team members. Like it is an unusual week where one of our teams isn't messaged by someone pretending to be me or our CFO or our CTO, and that happens all the time. And everyone jokes like, "Oh, like why do they do this? It's so obvious." The reason they do it is because it works. Like people fall for it, and they do this all the time. I do know someone actually who they got messaged by what they thought was their CEO, and was like, I'm having a really hard time," or like it was some outrageous demand for like, I need gift cards. I need you to go and buy me gift cards because blah. But like, but the whole thing was couched in like a reasonable justification, and they went with it because it was coming
It's
from the
so
CEO.
absurd.
Yeah, but it was like, but it
But
was
it
coming from the
happens. Like
yeah,
I
and it
could
was,
see myself falling for some weird, thing too. I guess maybe if it's
but it
couched
was,
the right way.
and the delivery was exactly how like it was on the channel that they communicate on, in a style that they communicate in. And even though the ask was a bit weird, like the everything around it made so much sense that they went with it. And so there's like, this happens all the time. It happens all the time. And so that's where we're really interested in building out like I guess ultimately it's underpinned by Telegram and Discord bots. I think we'll probably focus on the Telegram one first out of everything. But underpinning that basically is the ability for like within Telegram to basically like share credentials to other people without having to leave Telegram. And so what that means is like if like I would hope in the future, if any of our admins or moderators are having to speak directly to someone else, they can always prove who they work for. And similarly, like if you're a business development rep for someone else, you can always prove who you work for. Yeah, so that's Matt, our community manager, who has to deal with this on a daily basis. And that
He's here
like
in the chat for those listening. He's here in the chat, and we're just putting. He says hello. He says 100% goodbye scammers. Hello creds.
Yeah, exactly. And so this happens all the time. So this would be, let's say, like Matt's a great example. If like Cheqd issues Matt credentials to prove that he works for Cheqd, what his role is, like, and he's still currently working, like obviously, like especially with ambassadors and moderators, like there is turnover. And then whenever he interacts with someone in DMs, like he can prove to that person who he is without like that person needing to step out. And we can also do that for like BD reps in terms of like when they're just messaging someone. I don't know if anyone watching is aware of this, but like all the exchanges have like verify endpoints now and like pages where you can enter Telegram handles, so you can check, like they can check who people are. So like it's going down that. Yeah, exactly. So so Matt's just saying there, like apparently I asked him for 3 BNB last week, and that happens so regularly. And so basically all of that to say that we're going to be like rolling this thing out where projects, organizations, whatever, can issue credentials and then you can share them inside Telegram. The really nice thing about Telegram is because it has a web view, you can actually do the entire experience without having to leave. So you, like, I could share credentials directly to you. You wouldn't even have to leave Telegram to be able to check who I am. And it just adds like that layer to start protecting people, as well as like doing things like potentially gating Telegram, Telegram groups. And the final thing to say is like, one of the reasons why that's so important is we were speaking to another layer one, and they were just like, they've had to turn off DMs in Discord because it was the way that people were getting compromised left, right, and center. And so you're like, you basically you've had to disable one of the functionalities of Discord to protect your community. That like, so I think basically it's a mix of like, one side's very much going to be like learning and gamification. The other side is going to be like, let's start protecting people and stopping the amount of scams happening, because it's rampant, which is a shame.
So this all culminates on your hot take, which is the AI revolution and or the AI apocalypse. Sorry.
Yeah.
Which,
yeah.
Okay, depending from which point of view you're looking at it, it might be the same thing. But yeah. So how does Cheqd prevent us from heading into the AI apocalypse?
Yeah, and I think I should be specific there. So, like, obviously, AI is great for so many things. Like, for creds, we've been using Midjourney to generate images. Like, it works perfectly. It works really, really well. And so it's got some great uses, but at the same time, it is so good at generating just like either fraudulent data or helping people submit fraudulent data, or creating things that like don't make any sense, or like that you can't attribute. So just a couple of examples of like some of the problems it's creating right now. So the lower level one is just like an inability to attribute stuff. So one of our team members was pulling together this like big commercial model, and then like pulled some numbers out of ChatGPT for population numbers. And I was like, well, are they right? Like, where do these come from? And he's like, ChatGPT. I'm like, well, like, do we know that that's accurate? Like, how? So I then had to go through and just double check them, and it was fine. But like, it would be so much better if I knew where they came from in the first place. And the kind of a more problematic, not sinister, but like problematic issue that's really close to this is there was an article by The Guardian recently where they were talking about they keep on obviously getting contacted for references and for articles. And someone had got an article out of ChatGPT that was supposedly written in The Guardian by one of their authors or one of their writers. And they needed basically the original article for citation, and it never existed. And the article, apparently The Guardian spent 2 weeks trying to find this thing and contacted the writer and the author and was like, hey, can you remember writing this? And they were like, but it looks like something I'd write, and it's on a topic that I'd write about, but it just never existed. And so the ability to like just generate data in volumes and like potentially have nothing standing behind it is going to be so dangerous. So part of our like, and this is something that we really didn't see coming, but makes so much sense now in hindsight, is like all the value that's historically just been given of like, everyone talks about like the data economy, but I think that's now going to shift to what we're calling the trusted data economy, where like you need to know where that data comes from, you need to know whether it's trustworthy. And I think, and also the whole like not a bot, like I'm not talking to someone who is pretending to be someone else or something that's entirely artificial. And so that is where like I think Cheqd and Creds is going to really come into its own. So like Creds, mostly for the not a bot scenario, like prove that you are legitimate, you've got a history, like you can do that in any which way that you want and move that between communities. And then the value flow will be on Cheqd, which is like, can I like take this data in whatever industry to somewhere else? So like, let's say supply chain, I can take like a manifest, or actually even better, your example with corporate KYC, like generative AI is going to be able to issue so many of those documents where I could like spin up a fake company and it doesn't exist on paper, but I've got all the documents to prove it.
Yeah.
And so,
Jesus Christ.
yeah,
just opened up a whole can of worms here.
Exactly. But then like being able to prove where
God.
that came from in the first place and prove it's trusted is going to become so valuable versus like the danger of what could go wrong. So that's where like I think the actual like trust is going to be solved by credentials, but the kind of corollary or the parallel thing of that is all the value is going to shift from like just generic data to stuff that is trustworthy, where you know where it comes from and you can check the provenance of that all the way through. So it's going to be a fun time. I think it's especially with like fraud and this kind of stuff, it's always a game of cat and mouse. And I think at the moment, the mouse is probably a bit further ahead with all of like the AI tooling that's come out. And I think we're looking to be the cat that's kind of catching up and go like, we can protect ourselves against this, and we can capture the value that's part of it. So it's going to be fun and games over the next couple of years, I think.
Yeah. Well, this is a perfect segue to talk about Creds, which is this product that you guys are building. It's currently in waitlist, so people can sign up. We'll put the link in the show notes. But yeah, I think a good way to think about this is it is your first product being built on Cheqd, or it is like a product being built on the Cheqd platform.
Yeah, well, the first one that we've taken ownership of specifically. So as I mentioned, there's like a bunch of partners building stuff. This is the one where we've been like, weirdly, it started off like just to demonstrate like credentials and decentralized ID in a way that's fun. So that point earlier that we talked about, like loads of decentralized ID SSIs, all based around like pretty dry topics like KYC and national identity and stuff. And instead we were like, what if we just built something that's cool, that the community and anyone can interact with, that like it's just fun to use and it looks good. And where it kind of grew to was when we started fleshing it out, we're like, oh, well, what type of credentials would we use? Like, how would this all fit together? Then we started speaking to other people and other projects, and like, oh, like, I'd want to do this too. Like, I'd want to issue this credential. And we've had everything from like, I can't give that example because it would be so obvious who it is. But we've had loads of people being like, oh, I want to issue this type of credential. I want to be able to issue credentials off like Zeely, Layer 3, Crew 3, like all this kind of stuff. I want to be able to have like staking credentials. I want to be able to prove that I'm like a moderator, an ambassador, an NFT creator, and be able to prove that like it is me doing this stuff inside this realm. And so what started off as basically like a demo that we were building for our community is now just got like legs, and we're going to be rolling it out. And the idea is that it won't just be ourselves, like it'll be pretty much anyone who wants to start issuing credentials to anyone else in a way that is just like super simple, super easy to get on board with, and has that the two streams that I mentioned earlier. So one is like very much gamification, engagement, learning journeys, all that kind of good stuff. And then the other one is like the stuff that's a bit more high trust, like who do you work for? Can you prove that? Is that important to someone else? And use that to protect people. Both like I think we'll start on Telegram, then across Discord, a bunch of other stuff. So it's I think the other side is, again, to like bring it back, like it started off as a demonstration on like just showing SSI in a way that was like engaging. What we're finding now is because of that, people are coming to us being like, oh, hey, we want to get involved more in Cheqd like than we were before. We want to do this stuff. Like we want to be part of this journey. And we're also finding that it's going to be the perfect vehicle to demonstrate payments, because like we can just basically roll it out into something that is like everyone can see. We can show that it works and it's kind of imminent, and be able to show it all hangs together. So it's going to go from being like just what was just a demo platform to being like a supercharged demo platform that is then usable like, at least across Cosmos. And I think even further, because we're getting just randomly asked by other projects, like even outside of Cosmos, of like, could we use this in the future to go and do this, like X, Y, and Z? And we're like, yes, absolutely. We can't wait to do it. And it's tangible. I think like a lot of the Cheqd stuff, the cool stuff, is at the infrastructure layer, but that means it's really hard to see. It's really hard for people to interact with unless they're working with one of our partners or they are a partner. And creds is going to be the first thing that like everyone watching and on this call can see and they can interact with and they can use, both on the like collecting credentials, but also like issuing them to other people. So yeah, I having come from like corporate land and Accenture land and then focusing on infrastructure for like a year and a half, it's really fun to be able to start showing people like a slick UX and be like, this is what it's going to look like and this is how it's going to interact.
Shall we show the UX? Can I put this up on screen, or is it too early?
Which one do you have? I'm curious. Is it just the website?
Well, I was in the I was added to the wait list, so I've got my creds profile up here.
Oh damn! I don't think quite yet. I've been told by Eduardo to keep it under wraps. So
all right,
but I think
we'll have to come back. You'll have to come back and I'll have to do a demo when you guys are ready to show it, because I think it's cool. Like, I mean, you know, I'm looking at my creds profile here. I just claimed kind of like my Discord credential, and you can claim like there's a bunch of like demos here. But for example, like I can create I can say I'm a content creator, or I contributed to the docs, or I attended an event. And you know, I'd like to. We've talked about this. Is I'd like to see how we could leverage this for Nebula Summit and creating credentials for, say, people who have attended the conference, or people who have participated in a workshop, or this sort of thing. And so, you know, if that's something we could do this year, I'd love to experiment with that. Otherwise, maybe next year, or for like a future event, I think would be really cool.
No, this year sounds good. It's honestly like one of our biggest milestones is like get it to the point where like anyone running workshops theoretically at Nebula could issue credentials to whoever attends, and then those people, if they want to go off and like, I don't know, if it's the first time they've interacted with Cosmos and then they want to go and get like a junior dev role with a project, be able to show that they went to that workshop and they went through that journey, execute successfully, and possibly even have like the workshop like leader attest to how well they went through, would be really, really cool. So I think like, yeah, it's something we're like really, really targeting on our side. So Ross, our like head of product on this, is not going to like it. But that's like our big milestone that we're focusing on.
Cool. Yeah. And I mean, I think for the podcast too, there could be some interesting things to do here. I mean, I've been wanting to do like POAP type things for a long time. And this is an idea that we've had at Epicenter for years that we've never implemented, because at Epicenter, we have this really kind of cool artwork that we generate for every guest. And it could be cool to have kind of a credential. There's kind of a precedent to this, and OGs will remember the Let's Talk Bitcoin. Shout out to Adam B. Levine. Let's Talk Bitcoin token, and they had this whole thing where every podcast episode on the Let's Talk Bitcoin network, and we were part of that network, there was you could create a magic word. And so every episode, at some point in the middle of the episode, we'd say like, today's magic word is credentials. And then as a listener, you take that magic word, you log into your account, you'd enter it, and that was proof that you listened to the episode, and you get some tokens that are now worthless in exchange. And I thought it was a really cool thing that got a lot of people involved, and people would claim that thing, and they would like actively do it. And then they ended up having worthless tokens, but it was still a cool use case,
I totally agree. Like, one of the things I'm mourning, well, two things, is like when you travel now, you don't get in a lot of places, like you don't get a stamp. Like you don't get something like in your passport.
You don't keep your plane ticket.
Yeah, like you don't get that anymore. And also, like if you're going to like gigs or concerts, like all that kind of stuff, like you don't get that anymore. I used to love being able to go around like museums and find what they were putting on the tickets, because like it was always cool. It was always something unusual and different. And the same with like, I've still got like festival t-shirts from when I was 13 to 18. I did Leeds Festival 5 years in a row. Like I've still got those t-shirts, and I've still got the tickets, but like, and that's the kind of thing that I'm missing collecting now. You just can't get hold of them and be able to replicate that into something that's like still privacy preserving. I just have them for myself. I'd love. It would be so cool to have that, because it's gone missing. This whole shift to digital. It's like great. We're using less paper, fine, but like I want something that's equivalent. Like I want to be able to take something like somewhere.
Yeah, we like, as humans, we love to collect things, whether physical or digital, and certainly this is one solution, I think. And there are many other platforms that are. When we talked about POAP, of course, like they're taking a different approach, but I think all of this stuff ends up being quite useful for tons of different use cases, including the collectible use case.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think just going back to what you said like a couple of seconds ago, which was like the stuff that you were thinking about with like Nebula or Epicenter, I think it was, like what you could issue. That's been honestly the most fun with creds, is like taking this out and be like, look, this is what it looks like. This is what the interface is like. And everyone being like, oh, what if I could do this? Like, what if I could add this stuff in? We're like, awesome, because we've never thought of that before. There was one, like, I'm not going to say who they are, but they were like, oh, I want to use this to dox myself. Like, I want to use this to like show who I am in real life in a way that is like available, verifiable, and I can express it. Yeah, and in a way that like I can also shut it down afterwards, like if I don't like where it's going. And I can take that back, and no one's actually got the data to use like on my behalf. So it's been such a journey of like seeing what people want to use this stuff for in a way that it's basically, it's grown legs in a way that is fantastic, but we just weren't like, we were hopeful, but weren't exactly expecting it.
Great. Where do you want to send people to learn more about creds? Or should be, are you looking for people to build on the platform? Or are you looking for partners to integrate creds? Here's your chance to shill all the links.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best one is creds.xyz. So creds.xyz. Like that's easily the best place to start. You'll find a wait list, like get on that. Amazing. And the plan is that over the next couple of months, we'll be opening this up. Like it'll be available to like everyone to go in and collect. What we'll then do off the back of that is open up the issuance side. So that won't just be people being able to go in and collect stuff. It'll be projects being able to issue credentials out, or like left, right, and center, create new ones, explore, like merge them all together. And then on the Cheqd side, just head to like cheqd.io and then navigate from there. Like that's probably the best place to start on those two. But I think if you're kind of watching this and you're looking for like getting your hands on credentials, creds.xyz is the best place to start. That's going to be the really big thing.
Excellent. Fraser, thanks for coming on. It's been a pleasure.
No, likewise. It's been awesome. And looking forward to like opening this up and being able to show it off properly. It can't come soon enough.
Yeah. See you at Nebular.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Cheers.